Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn, Curating Orlando Collected. I'm Katie Kelley, and I'm the Curator of Exhibitions here at the History Center. I'd like to welcome everyone joining us here in person and also everyone joining us online on the live webinar. We greatly appreciate you supporting our programming by attending today. I also want to take a moment to thank our sponsors, Orlando Health and Hilb Group, for providing valuable support to our upcoming special exhibition, Orlando Collected, which opens to the public 1 week from tomorrow, on Saturday, April 12th. Today, we're here to share with you an in-depth look at our process in curating, designing, and building Orlando Collected. If you're joining us in person, we've left some Post-it notes on the table for you to write down any questions that you have. We'll come around and collect those at the end when it's time for questions. And if you're joining us online, feel free to leave questions in the comment, in the chat, and Cheyenne will relay those to me. So let me start by giving you an overview of what Orlando Collected is. So this is first and foremost a special exhibition to mark Orlando's 150th anniversary. While the name Orlando dates back to the 1850s, it was not officially incorporated as a town until 1875. So this exhibition is the History Center's contribution to the events that will be marking this 150th anniversary. I've put up there for you the website that the City of Orlando has created in order to share everything that they're doing, and we've been working closely with them in partnership for this exhibition as well. Second, Orlando Collected is our opportunity to highlight the important act of promoting and sharing history through collecting items from the past and preserving them for future generations. To do this, we've decided to curate 150 items, mostly from our own collection, to mark 150 years. So the exhibition is not a narrative or linear history of Orlando. I want to be clear about that. When you come to this exhibition, you're not going to see the history of Orlando. Rather, it places the act of collecting at the forefront by making these things that we've been saving from the past the highlight of the exhibition. There will be ample opportunities, including here and different programming, to learn about the narrative history of Orlando throughout this year. In fact, towards the end of April, we're hosting one of those events with a very knowledgeable historian. I'll tell you about that at the end. Rather than doing that, we thought that it would really be a great contribution for us to commemorate the 150th anniversary by using it as an opportunity to feature some of the items we've been caring for throughout the city's history and putting them on display for the public to enjoy. In fact, many of the items that are in the exhibition are actually going to be on show for the first time in Orlando Collected. Finally, a third key factor to understand Orlando Collected is that it is curated in collaboration with the Orlando community. We've invited numerous individuals and organizations to act as what we're calling community curators to select items that are on display. These include public figures, businesses, arts and culture organizations, members of the media, which is what this is a picture of our media wall. And I think all except for two things on this wall are actually community curated, so I chose it for this slide. And many more. So I don't have an exact number, but I believe approximately half of the items that are on display in Orlando Collected are actually community curated, so chosen by individuals who are not actually part of the exhibition development process. This is our way of acknowledging the important role our community plays in preserving our history. The History Center is operated by Orange County and the Historical Society of Central Florida together to preserve and share Central Florida's history. One of our most important roles in doing so is to collect and protect the myriad of artifacts, documents, photographs, ephemera, oral histories, and much, much more from our community's past. Collecting by the History Center is done very intentionally and thoughtfully. This process is guided by a collections policy that lays out the criteria for what we collect and how we collect. The Historical Society's Board of Directors has a committee that oversees the accessioning and deaccessioning of items into the collection. Our collections team of 9 people includes a curator, an assistant curator, an archivist, a digital archivist, a historian, a collections manager, a registrar, and 2 associates. So it's a pretty substantial team of people that do the work to make sure that our collection is well-rounded, that it's properly cataloged and organized, that it's well-maintained, and perhaps most importantly, that it's in a condition and format to be accessible to the public, to be used by our community. A great deal of care is put into caring for the items that our community has entrusted to us. As important in our role in being the caretakers of this collection is, the collection ultimately starts with the Central Florida community. Individuals, families, organizations, and businesses take the first step in preserving our history. By taking photographs, by saving your records, by recording videos of important events or even your daily life, we are actually recording the history of our lives, our businesses, and our communities. Taking that extra step to then donate all of that recorded history to a museum, archive, or library helps to ensure that these pieces of history will be around for a long time and made accessible for future generations to learn from. These are a couple of examples of that. So the scrapbook on the right is from a local historian who moved here with her family. She emigrated from Sweden in the 1880s. Her name was Kina Fries. She kept scrapbooks, and then she actually wrote one of Orlando's early histories. And so we have her collection. And then this is a letter that was donated to us by Mary I. Johnson, who was a city commissioner and then later a county commissioner, from Mayor Glenda Hood, congratulating her when she was elected into office as an Orange County commissioner. And so Glenda Hood saved her records and then donated them to us. So these are just a few examples of how our community is doing that. Providing access to the items collected from our history can come in a variety of ways. Maintaining the condition of historical collections as well as digitizing large portions of the collection helps them to remain available for reference and research. Sometimes access comes in the form of educational programming or publications, for example, school field trips or the monthly Lunch and Learn that you all are attending today. Our magazine, Reflections from Central Florida, our social media posts, and more all utilize our collection and present it to the public in a variety of formats. Then, of course, there's my personal favorite method through our exhibitions here at the museum. Our exhibitions team works very closely with our collections team to select and display items for exhibition. In addition to our 4 core exhibitions and the restored 1927 courtroom, we typically create at least 1 special exhibition every year and 3 pocket exhibits, which are the small, like mini exhibits that are in the lobby that rotate in and out every 3 or 4 months, every year. So these exhibits feature items from our collections that help tell stories in Central Florida's history in engaging, accessible, and visually appealing ways. So a little bit about why we decided to do Orlando Collected. We decided that we would take a prominent role in marking Orlando's 150th anniversary. So the 1927 courthouse, which is now home to the Orange County Regional History Center, along with Heritage Square Park, which is the park directly to the south of our building, it really stands as the cornerstone of Orlando's history. Heritage Square Park, which was formerly called Courthouse Square, has been home to 6 historic courthouses, including a log-hewn structure that was built in 1863, this 1875 courthouse, which was built using a donation from Jacob Summerlin of $10,000. The beautiful 1892 Victorian courthouse that's in the bottom left over there. And then this building, the 1927 Beaux Arts style courthouse. And then the annex that was built in 1960 out in what is now Heritage Square Park. Now, when Orlando was incorporated, the reason we say that this is really the heart of Orlando's history, in fact, that's what I titled the section of the exhibit about the courthouses, as the heart of Orlando's history, is because when Orlando was incorporated in the 1875 courthouse, the city's boundaries, the town's boundaries were set 1 mile in every direction from that square. And the incorporation actually took place in Courthouse Square in that whichever version of the courthouse was standing at that time. So this courthouse was built in 1875, which is the same time the incorporation happened. And I didn't find in my research the exact date that this was built, so it was either its predecessor or this building. So when it comes to marking the anniversary of Orlando's founding, our organization naturally feels an affinity for that story. Not only are we the largest history museum in Orlando, but our building and its predecessors that stood in Courthouse Square, which is now Heritage Square Park, were quite literally at the heart of where Orlando's founding took place. So we're going to turn now to talk about the actual curation process. That's a little bit about why we're doing this exhibit. And now I want to talk a little bit about how we did the exhibit and what that actual process looked like. So curating this exhibition was definitely unique in that the overall concept does not lend itself to the typical process of curating an exhibit. So what you see on your screen is kind of an infographic that sort of lays out how we would typically go about this process. So most modern history exhibits tend to be narrative, meaning they use the physical space of the gallery to tell a story. So typically their development follows a process that is born out of that narrative. We start with a historical topic that we want to talk about. We conduct research on that topic. From the research, we decide what is the story that we're going to tell. Then we build the exhibition to support that story. Then artifacts that support the story and supplement the information are selected. And then the physical space is designed to tell the story in a physical space and also to highlight the artifacts that support that story. For Orlando Collected, the concept of the exhibition did not allow us to follow that process. Because the exhibition process started with selecting the historical items, and the objects that would be on display. And because Orlando Collected, as I said, doesn't include a linear narrative, it's not the story of Orlando. It's a collection of artifacts from Orlando's history. So the process was basically flipped on its head. In the typical process, you can see object selection is a few steps down. And in fact, if I were to make this chart, I would even put it down a little farther. But for us, object selection went right up to the top, next to concept. And so then we actually were having to develop the theme and the design of the exhibit simultaneously to choosing the artifacts, and that's not typical. And then from there, we were able to then do research, which is normally the first step of the process. We had to wait until we knew what was going to be in the exhibit, because when you don't know what's going to be in the exhibit, you can't do research on it. And then from there, we then were able to create a concept design, lay out the exhibit, and then go into fabrication, installation, et cetera. So this definitely presented some unique challenges and required us to continually adapt and develop as these phases were happening simultaneously more than would be typical. And it involved us sometimes having to make design decisions before we had actually finalized what was going to be in the exhibit. It was a bit nerve-wracking to have to make these decisions, for example, on how items would be displayed when we didn't even know what those items were yet. So we made it happen. I'm very, very fortunate to have a really talented team that creates our exhibits. And they're both very experienced and very knowledgeable, and they have a lot of experience and intuition working in our galleries specifically. So they had a really good sense of like what would work in a lot of different scenarios, and we just sort of winged it from there, figured it out as we went. And ultimately the result is beautiful. I don't know if any of you sort of looked up in the mezzanine, but it's really shaping up to be a really beautiful exhibit. So I'm excited for everyone to see it. This looks crazy. These are a few of my notes from this process. And these directly relate to the things I'm about to talk about. So I just wanted to sort of share a little bit of the insight of some of the frenetic energy of us trying to figure this process out when we weren't able to follow what we would typically do. So the process of curating the items for the exhibit took about 8 months total, which is an astronomical amount of time for the overall, just choosing artifacts. That's a long time in the overall process. So it took us about 8 months in total because we did this community curation, which is valuable and really adds a lot to the exhibit. From tens of thousands of items that we have in our collection that are related to Orlando's history, we had to figure out how to narrow that down to just 150, and then we also had to figure out and how do we let the community choose those. So it took a lot of consideration, coordination, and collaboration, not only with the community, but with working very nimbly with our collections team, who was a huge support in this whole process. So the process began with the exhibitions and collections team meeting to discuss 3 key factors that sort of guided our process. The first is, what is our criteria for selecting objects for the exhibition? You have to sort of give yourself some sort of framework to work within. The next criteria is, what iconic or historic entities from Orlando's past should be represented if possible? And then the third was, how do we approach the selection process in coordination with the community? The answer to the first of those, the selection criteria that we identified, was that we would have to define this geographically. Items selected must be associated with an Orlando address in some way. So that means that not every item on display would necessarily be from one of the 6 City of Orlando districts, but it could also include areas that are outside of the City of Orlando's jurisdiction and fall under Orange County jurisdiction, the unincorporated parts of Orlando, but that they do have an Orlando address. So the reason we made this decision is that we felt that most people don't necessarily associate Orlando by those confines of the city districts, right? Most people probably don't even know what those confines are, where those districts begin and end. I certainly don't. I mean, I have a general sense, but I don't know exactly what streets are within the bounds of the City of Orlando's jurisdiction. And so by that criteria, our exhibition could, for example, feature items from Gatorland, which is not part of the City of Orlando, but it does have an Orlando address. But it could not feature items from Disney, which is entirely out of Orlando. So when you go in the exhibit and you don't see Disney stuff, that's why, because I know we're going to hear about it. Regarding the second factor in the process, that of iconic or historic must-sees, we developed a list of around 100 topics that our years of doing history in this community and talking to the community about the things that they remember of their history, we developed a list of things that we thought would be particularly nostalgic or the things that permeate the memories of many in Orlando. These include people, places, events, and more. From these, we narrowed it down to the 50 that we felt were most prominent and also feasible for us to pull off. And then our collections manager and our registrar and our archivist, so 2 of them are in the back of the room right now, they actually were tasked with coming up with a list of 25 must-sees from the collection. So we wanted to start out with 25 of what we thought were, you absolutely have to see it, that's in our collection. And then from there, we opened it up to the community. So this, the document on the left over there is actually my notes from one of our subsequent meetings when we were narrowing down to try to get to 50 of the iconic topics. And not all of those actually made it into the exhibit, but many of them did, so. The other is the mess of us trying to name this exhibit, which was its own unique challenge, because this exhibit does 3 very distinct things. It's in collaboration with the community, it honors 150 years, and it is about the collection. We could not fit all of that into one title, so we landed on Orlando Collected, but it took a while. And then finally, regarding the third key factor, I apologize. I don't expect you to read this, by the way. I just wanted to give a sense of how we organized all of this information with curating with the community. If it feels like you're being assaulted by spreadsheets, that's because what I went through for 8 months was being assaulted by spreadsheets. So the third key factor was, how do we approach a community curation? We knew we could not just send people lists of thousands of items to choose from and sift through, so we actually knew that we would have to come up with some sort of system to provide guidance for that community selection. To do this, we first came up with a list of topics that we felt were either major themes in Orlando's history, prominent figures, or subjects that are well represented in our collection that we knew we would have stuff for. That's what that list with the black writing is, or the black list with the white writing. Again, I understand you can't read that, but if you're interested, you can talk to me after. Next, we generated a list of approximately 150 individuals and organizations throughout Orlando that we wanted to approach to act as community curators. The intention really wasn't to have 150 curators for 150 items. We knew that that wouldn't be possible. It just so happens that once we came up with everybody we thought we should invite to curate for us, it ended up being around 150 people. We wanted to make sure we had a varied pool of community curators that included individuals and organizations who have been champions of history and promoting our local arts and culture, as well as some key figures in the community. Once we had our list, we emailed all of these people and organizations and invited them to participate. Of course, we did not necessarily hear back from everyone, and some declined, but overall, we were thrilled with the response and our community's interest in taking part in this process. To have over half of the items in the exhibit chosen by people outside of the team actually developing the exhibit, I think is a really great representation of the community and definitely achieves what we were hoping for. Those who were interested were asked to let us know which topics in Orlando history they were most interested in. Then our collection staff put together lists of artifacts for them to choose from based on those interests. Since we know that many of the people and organizations we approached value history, we assumed many of them may have items related to their own history that may be even better representations than what we have in our collection. So everybody that we approached was also given the opportunity to loan us something rather than choosing something from our collection. Several took us up on that offer. So the exhibition does feature mostly items from our collections, but it also features many items from collections throughout the community. I think that's a very fitting for the theme of our exhibition and for what we're hoping to accomplish with it. So just a little bit about who the community curators are. I, of course, won't go through the whole list, but I'll tell you, when you see the exhibit, we do on every label, if it is community curated, we acknowledge that, and it says either courtesy of or curated by for everybody who participated from outside of the exhibit team and the collection team developing the exhibit. So I'll give you a few examples, though. So the first, we invited, we gave the opportunity to all of the staff members here at the History Center to choose an item, and also our board of directors for the Historical Society of Central Florida. We wanted to make sure that they had the opportunity to curate something in recognition of their dedication to helping this organization thrive so we can continue to preserve our community's history. We also invited both Mayor Dyer and Mayor Demings, both of whom participated. We invited prominent figures who helped shape Orlando's history, including Linda Chapin and Glenda Hood. We invited lots of different community organizations. These include, but certainly aren't limited to, the Center, Page 15, and the League of Women's Voters. Many in media participated, including Watermark Out News, Nancy Alvarez of WESH 2, the Orlando Sentinel, the Bungalower, and more. Some of our arts and culture partners, including Orlando Science Center, Orlando Ballet, and Opera Orlando. And there were lots more, so just make sure you look at the labels when you're going through the exhibit. You'll find lots of interesting folks. The involvement of the community curators is a key aspect of this exhibition. One of the themes that is most important to us is highlighting that collecting history is something that the whole community does. We only have our collection because individuals and organizations in the community make the choice to collect their own history and donate it to our collection. Inviting the community to participate in curating the exhibit is a way for us to honor that contribution. Community collaborators also improve the variety of what is represented in the exhibit. And some of the most interesting items in the exhibit are those that were loaned to us by other organizations. I'll highlight some of those a little bit later in the presentation. Once we'd gotten pretty far along in the process of receiving selections of community curators, we then looked at what had been curated against our original list of 50 things that we thought were really important to highlight. And then our collections team went back and selected some items to fill those gaps. Of course, not everything that we consider iconic or that would be featured in the best case scenario can be represented in the exhibit. First, not every iconic or nostalgic piece of Orlando's history is represented in our collection. We don't have everything. We collect what is made available to us, and that effort is ongoing. We'll never be able to stop collecting. As new things are made available to us, new methods to preserve history occur all the time, so it'll be ongoing. We're also limited by the available space and logistics of transporting and displaying certain items. There's lots of cool stuff in our collection, it's just not able to be displayed. We don't want to make it travel, that kind of stuff. And then there are a number of other factors that certainly play into all that. But I'm confident that we and our community curators have curated an interesting and well-rounded selection of artifacts to mark Orlando's 150th anniversary. And as I said, in a few moments, I'll share a few highlights of what those are, so you get a bit of a sneak peek. In terms of designing the actual experience, so the image on the left there is our layout of the visitor's experience. It lays out how we expect visitors to move through the exhibit. And then all of these little squares over here are all of the walls in the exhibit. So this is kind of where we start the process. In designing the exhibit experience, one of the major factors we had to grapple with was how to organize the exhibit with 150 items that only relate to each other and that they're all from Orlando's past. There really was not an obvious way to lay things out the way there typically would be when you're using artifacts to support a narrative story. So we essentially broke everything up into categories. These categories are things like stuff related to education, stuff related to local businesses, stuff related to the sports scene in Orlando, arts and culture, civic leadership, etc. We also had several items that spoke more to the overall trajectory of Orlando's history, but did not necessarily fit neatly into other categories. So this gave us an opportunity to use the largest wall in the exhibit, which is what is pictured on the left there. It gave us the opportunity to use that wall to give a brief overview of Orlando's history. I sort of consider this Orlando History's elevator speech because it really is just base foundational knowledge, like these were key factors in the development of Orlando. Again, it's certainly not all-encompassing. In order to keep the project timeline on track, we had to complete this categorization and laying out this space before we actually even had everything finalized of what was going to be in the exhibit. So we had to be nimble throughout the process, adding things and taking things off the list as we moved through development. For example, there were a few categories that actually moved to a new area of the exhibit as items were curated, and we determined that like oh, this framed object is like 70 inches by 48 inches, it needs a much bigger wall. So we would end up having to move whole sections of the exhibit to different areas than we had originally planned. A few times we did have to make the tough decision to actually take things out of the exhibit. Everything that was curated by someone in the community did remain, however. We made sure that we prioritized those items. Once we got far enough along in the process that changing the layout was no longer an option, I just talked about that, sorry. I lost my place in my notes. Okay. So the design concept for Orlando Collected is intended to reinforce that central theme that I feel like I've mentioned a few times now, which is that we collect because you collect first. So it is the idea that while we may house and care for this collection, the vast majority of what we have came to us from someone who thought it was significant and wanted to save it for posterity. Whether it be family heirlooms, diaries, photographs, cookbooks, whatever it may be, businesses or public figures that save their records, or any myriad of other ways historical items are collected. That first step in the process to preserve a historical item is the decision of an individual to save something. And sometimes those individuals make the decision to then donate it to a museum or an archive or a library. So the design of the exhibition reinforces this theme through its visual messaging, starting from the logo, which we designed as a curio cabinet, referencing a quintessential way to store and display a personal collection. You can see in the logo that we designed, each of those pictures are representations of things that, at least at the time that we were designing the logo, were expected to be in the exhibit. So we have Billy the Swan there. We have a carousel. You might have seen the carousel from Wilson's Shoe Store when you came in the building. A telephone. These are things that were curated for the exhibit. The first picture over there was actually a really important inspiration photo when we were first laying out our vision boards for the exhibit. We all were really drawn to that idea of showing things in sort of their own compartment and silhouetted. The middle one was like the first pass at a logo, and we didn't think that it was, terribly exciting or beautiful, but you have to start somewhere. And then we eventually landed on this final logo for the exhibition. The word collected even is very thoughtfully, it's a custom font that our graphic designer made, very thoughtfully in order to sort of portray this idea of handwriting, like an individual recording their own history. The exhibition also features references within the exhibit to pull that theme of collecting being personal throughout the exhibition. So it included custom wallpaper, which will show up in one of these other pictures somewhere, silhouettes of various kinds of home furnishings, museum cases, custom cases that are made to look like furniture, and a wall that looks like an old photo album, which is what this one is. We also wanted to ensure that our oral history collection was highlighted in the exhibition. This picture is obviously not a photograph of that wall. The AV elements, the audio-visual elements, are the last things that get installed. So our oral history wall will be going in probably Monday. But this is sort of our design concept that we lay out so that we know that we have enough space for everything, et cetera. So that's what that is. Learning about history through someone's actual sharing their lived experience, hearing what they highlight as the most memorable aspects and in their own words and voice is an incredibly compelling and important way to learn about the past. So in one section of the exhibit, you can listen to these oral history clips pulled from our collection of folks from different walks of life, talking about what life in Orlando was like through different periods of the 20th century. We also have a section called Your Collected History, where people are invited to reflect on and share the ways that they are preserving history in their own lives. So you may notice on your table, there are some cards that look like these cards up here. We have these cards designed to sort of represent ways that people preserve their own history, whether it be making your grandmother's recipes and passing them down, whether it be taking photographs, so there's a Polaroid, keeping a diary, or this is a label to a VHS tape for those who are old enough to remember those. So keeping family videos, that sort of thing. So we actually would like for guests in the exhibit to reflect on how they preserve their own history and curate it in our cabinet, which that's sort of the mock-up drawing of the cabinet that it'll be curated in. So I actually invite all of you, if you are willing to. There are some of those left on your table. I would encourage and invite you all to fill those out with one way that you reflect on that you're actually preserving your history. And then those will go in the exhibit prior to opening. And that would actually really help us out, because to have a blank interactive on the wall, when people see that other people have done it, they're more inclined to then do it. So if we have some to start out with, that'll really help us out. So I invite you to do that. Finally, the exhibition concludes with a call to action, basically reiterating that our effort to collect items related to our community's past is ongoing and will continue to be ongoing as every day new history is made, new methods of communicating are developed, and we'll have to continue to be in touch with our community to continue to collect those stories and those items. So we also invite guests to reach out to us. Oh, it's not there, sorry. To reach out to us if they think that they would be a good fit to sit for an oral history interview, or if they have items that they're interested in donating to our collection. Throughout this process, we did face some challenges and surprises. I've already talked a bit about the challenge of curating the exhibition when the concept doesn't allow for the normal process, so I won't go into that anymore. But one thing that I can elaborate a little more on is the unique challenge of displaying 150 items, most of which need their own individual display method. It really hit us through this process just how many artifacts 150 is. Out of curiosity's sake, I actually walked our main core galleries to get a sense of how many artifacts are on show in other galleries. Those much bigger galleries have in the neighborhood of 50 artifacts each, so we've tripled that in a smaller gallery. And most of them are displayed using just a few display methods, so there may be 20 items in one case. So for this exhibit, I did some rough calculations to sort of give us a sense of what we had to do to actually accomplish this and have a method to display 150 different things. And we custom designed and cut 38 pieces of acrylic to display archival materials. We constructed 11 custom wall cases to display individual items. We constructed 2 large custom floor cases and 2 small custom display cases for individual items. We built an additional 14 custom display stands for items that could neither go in cases or hang on the wall. We're additionally using 15 standard wall or floor museum cases, so cases that we've purchased. We sent 10 items out for custom framing, and then we had in the neighborhood of about 40 items that needed some sort of custom hanging mechanism, because hanging on a wall was not their original intended purpose. So I chose a couple pictures here that highlight some of those things, like this, on the picture on the right, this wood block, it's a giant wood block that has flooring from Gatorland before the fire. That's actually on loan to us from Gatorland. But that's not something you'd normally hang on a wall. We cut custom plex for a couple of, this pennant is not a normal shape, so we had to do custom plex for that. Clapboard, not originally intended to be on a wall, so we had to come up with a way to hang that. So it really was an involved process in figuring out exactly how all of it was going to come together. So, these are just a couple of designs of the custom cases. Sorry, I forgot to switch slides. A couple of the custom cases that we actually developed for this exhibit. So you can see we've carried that curio cabinet theme through, and you'll see a curio cabinet as one of ours. There's a couple that look like tables. You probably saw one of them when you came off the elevator and saw Billy out there, Billy the Swan. So that's one of the custom stands that our exhibition tech made. Another challenge was figuring out how we provide content for what is essentially 150 separate stories. It's not exactly 150 because there are in some instances where a couple of items relate to each other, but certainly over 150 potential stories. The challenge was that to add context for an artifact or historical information for an artifact in the exhibit, we wouldn't have anywhere close to space to have 150 individual labels with everything else. Even if we limited each one to 50 words, which is like maybe 2 sentences, there would have still been, that would have put us at 7,500 words in the exhibit, then another 2,500 for introductory text and context. And then we would more than double that when we add the Spanish, because any new exhibit going into the History Center is bilingual, English and Spanish. So basically, people would have walked into a term paper on the walls, and we did not want to do that. So nothing will kill a pleasant experience like being overwhelmed by words in your face. So to solve this, we decided that we would actually create an artifact guide that people can pick up through different various places throughout the exhibit, that if they're interested in a particular item, they can go to the artifact guide to find out more about that. That sort of helps people dictate the level of information that they want to receive. So you may be someone who wants to read every word in that whole guide, or you may be somebody that doesn't pick the guide up at all and just reads the label of what the things are, right? And so it gives you that opportunity to do that. The artifact guide also allowed us to provide some supplemental information, like this example from Kina Fry's diary, which is in the exhibit. But by doing the artifact guide, we were able to actually translate one of the passages. It's actually her first entry into English, because it's written in Swedish, and provide that information so that guests can sort of read. She was, I think, 15 years old at the time, and this is clearly the diary of a 15-year-old girl, so it's really cute. So we were able to do those extra things by having the artifact guide. I put a few on the tables if you guys are interested in looking at those before you leave, too. All right, so now I think we have some time. We have a little bit of time. So I will go ahead and highlight a few of the things that are in the exhibit so that you get a little bit of a sneak preview. So I'm not going to go too in-depth, and I'm not going to do too many of these, because this summer our collections team will actually be leading Lunch and Learn that will be more of a deep dive into some of the interesting items from the exhibit. But one that I want to share, we are very thankful to Opera Orlando, who recorded this song from 1926 for us. The sheet music is featured in the exhibit. And when you enter the exhibit, it wasn't there at the time, as I said. AV elements are the last to go in. On that table will be a radio, and you'll be able to press the button and hear this song. So I'm going to go ahead and play the song so that you guys can, I'll just play like the first minute of it so that you can get sort of a sneak peek of it before everyone else. I'm in Love with You from 1926. Orlando, we're all in love with you.
I know a place, a lovely place, where skies are always blue, where skies are always, where breezes blow, where flowers grow, and friends are always true. Orlando.
can hear the whole thing in the exhibit. I just think it's so cute, and we're really grateful to Opera Orlando, like perfectly captured the essence, and it was just lovely. So I was excited by it. How do I start this from the current slide? Oh, well, okay, we're just gonna zip right through. Okay. Another interesting one is this fire-damaged witness stand. So this is actually from this courthouse, this 1927 building. Most of you have probably visited our restored courtroom B on the 3rd floor. However, the furniture that's up there was not originally in that courtroom. It was moved from courtroom A when this building was being renovated to become the History Center. An electrical fire broke out when they were working in courtroom B, and it damaged the witness stand, the judge's bench, the mural behind the judge's bench. So all of those items that are currently up there were actually taken from courtroom A. They were salvaged from courtroom A, which hadn't been demolished yet, and they were installed into courtroom B. This witness stand was actually saved, and it's been crated up for the last 25 years until now, when we were able to uncrate it with some effort and 6 people and put it on display in the exhibit. The picture on the left there is, I really wanted, because, as I said, our building in the Heritage Square Park are so at the center of Orlando's history. It was really important to me that the courthouses and the information about them be the first topic that you encounter once you get through the overview history. And so that required us to move it down that narrow aisleway into the first alcove, which that aisleway is 40 inches wide and the witness stand is 48 inches wide. So we actually created a cardboard mock-up, a model of it, which is what you see in the left picture, so that we could figure out how we would need to maneuver it to get it down the aisle so that we could make this happen. It was one of the things I was kind of a stickler for, that I really felt that the courts should be the first thing that people encounter. And so in order to do that, we had to make sure that we could fit the witness stand there. And had we not been able to do that, it actually would have changed the entire layout of the exhibit. We would have flipped it. Right now you enter on the west side of the exhibit. We would have flipped it so you enter on the east side of the exhibit. The entire layout and experience would have been different if not for this one thing. So I thought that was a kind of interesting tidbit. In the development process, we generate lots of ideas that aren't actually able to ultimately come to fruition. And one of those ideas for us was this idea that in the exhibit we would share comments from the community curators about why they chose what they chose. I've already explained we had a words problem in this exhibit, too many words, and so we couldn't do that. There were too many of them to make it be an AV element where people could listen to it. So it's one of those ideas that was great, but we ultimately weren't able to accomplish. So I thought I would just share a couple of those that I think are particularly interesting for why someone chose something. So this is a melted phone from the Broadway United Methodist Church, which experienced a substantial fire on January 10th of 1980. And the building had to undergo massive renovations. This phone was salvaged from one of the offices at the church, and it was chosen by our technical lead in exhibits, the person who builds everything and figures out all the electrical components. His name's Paul, and he actually chose this. He curated this because he was a kid at the time in 1980. He was like a teenager, and he remembers on his listening to his family's police scanner, hearing the call come in that the church was on fire. So when he started here and he saw that we had this in our collection, it was like a really interesting moment of connection to the past for him. So he curated this item, and I thought that was such a great story. Another one we have on the right here is, I'm not a science person, so I'm going to read because I'm going to get this wrong if I don't. Marshall Nirenberg's 1965 summary of the genetic code that he gifted to Orange County Public Schools. So Marshall Nirenberg is a graduate of Orlando High School, and if you're not familiar with him, he's kind of a big deal. He was a groundbreaking biochemist and geneticist who shared the 1968 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for deciphering the genetic code and demonstrating how DNA sequences determine protein synthesis. His work laid the foundation for modern molecular biology and advanced our understanding of the central dogma of genetics. And he graduated from Orlando High School. So OCPS curated this item. They actually own this and they loaned it to us because to them they wanted to highlight the excellence of one of their most distinguished students. Another distinguished student from Orlando High School is John Young. The other two items in that picture are related to him, and these were actually loaned to us from the Orlando Science Center. So John Young is one of the most distinguished graduates of Orlando High School. He achieved numerous milestones in his decorated career, including walking on the moon during the Apollo 16 mission, piloting the first space shuttle flight, and becoming the first person to fly 6 space missions. There is a special connection between John Young and the Orlando Science Center. They used to, in fact, be named from 1973 to 1984. They were named the John Young Museum and Planetarium. So I don't know if it was he himself or his estate gifted these to the Orlando Science Center, and so they loaned them to us for this exhibition. I think this might be, not quite yet. So one other I'll talk about, the Orlando Sentinel election night covers from 2000. If you lived in Florida in 2000, you remember that election night. It was actually my first election I was able to vote in. So the Orlando Sentinel loaned us these 4 covers. Essentially, what happened was on election night, as things were going crazy and the news kept changing and they didn't know who was going to win, the Orlando Sentinel was trying to print their newspaper for the next day. And so every time they'd get through a print run, there was some new story, like there was some new outcome. And so they'd get through one print run and they'd have to switch everything out and go to a different headline. And then they did it again, and then they did it again. So these are 4 covers that they kept from that process of the news just switching. So they loaned these to us. They're on loan from the Orlando Sentinel. And then finally, the Ivy's drugstore sign. So Grover Doc Ivy opened his first drugstore on Orange Avenue in 1926. In 1949, when the avenue was extended south past Lake Lucerne, Ivy built a new store at the corner of Orange Avenue and Gore Street. This sign was used there until the business closed in 1985, following the retirement of Grover's son, James, who had been running the store since 1964. This is a really cool item to have in the exhibit because probably a lot of people who've lived in Orlando for a long time remember seeing this, right? It's one of those iconic things that we wanted to represent. This was actually curated by Travis Puterbauer, a curator of collections. What you need to know about this is it's giant, it's heavy, it needed its own custom stand. It was one of the most logistically difficult items in the exhibit. And Travis originally wanted to curate something, and our collection manager told him no, because that item was not in condition to be displayed. And so they have since taken to calling this Travis's Revenge, because they feel like he chose the most difficult thing to give them revenge for not getting his original item. That's the rumor. I don't know if it's true. So to wrap things up, although our collection houses hundreds of thousands of items, it is impossible to encompass every significant figure and topic in Orlando's history. The work of collecting and preserving our community's story is never complete. Each day brings new discoveries about people and events that deserve representation. Each day, new history is made and new ways of documenting and sharing our lives emerge. We embrace the ongoing opportunity to learn about and share Orlando's continually unfolding story while caring for the items that bring that story to life. Our collection begins and ends with our community, and we welcome your input on new avenues as we continue to grow and enrich it. So you are invited to email our collections team at orlandocollected@ocfl.net throughout the duration. That email will be operational throughout the duration of the exhibit, with suggestions of individuals whose stories we need to hear or collections that are in need of preservation. So to reiterate for anybody who couldn't hear and for the webinar, Emily, our collections manager, is back there. She said that originally our curator of collections wanted to curate an animatronic Dalmatian dressed as a firefighter named Sparky, but that there were, I'm not going to summarize the whole thing, but that there were elements of his physicality, his anatomy, whatever it may be, that were not in good enough condition to withstand the travel here and the display, the length of display, etc. So that's just one. There were certainly others I can't think of off the top of my head, but maybe if you chat with me after, I might come up with a few. The next one is there a topic or event in Orlando's history you wish you had images or artifacts for this particular exhibit that the museum doesn't have in its collection? Myriad, so many. The one thing that we are currently trying to do and have been trying to do for probably the last 10 years or so is make our collection look more like our community. So I would have loved to have an item from the Wells-Built Museum, or an item from the Wells-Built Hotel. And we don't have anything related to that, which is fine because the Wells-Built has their own museum and they're able to do that. But I would have liked to have had something in our collection to display from that as just one example. There are lots of others. I would say, generally speaking, the collection of items related to people of color is a work in progress, and our collections team is doing a lot to try and correct that, but you go through decades and decades and decades of collecting. Our collection started back in the 1940s, I think, and so it just sort of matters like what was the priority of the people who did that collecting through the years, and so if that has only become a priority in the last 20 years, then we have just less representation of those things. So thank you for joining us today. We hope that you enjoyed today's program. Supporting our programming is one of the best ways to support the History Center.